everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is your host, Kushalmehra. All right. England just had an election, and that was a lot of fun. We had a new political party coming to power, and boy, did they come in power with a bang. Well, Mr. Modi wanted 400 par over here. He couldn't get the 400 figure over here. But you have Starmer over there coming in. With a landslide victory, and to talk about the entire election process, how and the results, what's the good, what's the bad, what's the ugly. I have Charlotte Littlewood. Charlotte, how are you doing?
Doing very well. Thank you for having me on, Kushal. How are you doing?
I'm good. This It's been a while since you and I have spoken, so I'm looking forward to this. Unfortunately, when you're in India, I'm not in India. When I'm in England, you're not in England, so we couldn't
Yeah,
meet in person.
that's because we're both traveling too much. We need to slow down.
Yes, both of us need to slow down. So let's start over here. So, to break things down, the results make it sound as if Labour has swept the entire election. Do you think it is a positive vote for Labour? That would be my first question.
Mm.
Or it is a multitude of issues. It's not as simple as it sounds on paper. As in, you have on what are they called, the Reform Party? The Reform Party has risen a lot in this election. Their vote share has increased and the number of seats has increased. So I'm assuming they must have eaten into a significant chunk of the Tories' vote percentage. So they came down, and then you had another party. I forgot the name of the party, that they also gained some vote, and the Labour vote percentage overall has not risen really compared to previous elections. So
Yes.
how do we analyze this then?
Yeah, so I think the first question is yes, of course, this is a huge success for Labour. But when you look more deeply at how Labour technically won this election, although they won two-thirds of the seats, I think it was 410 or 411, so a huge number of seats, they only actually had one-third of the votes. So we have proportional representation in the UK, which means your percentage amount of votes doesn't necessarily mean how many seats that you have and your seats that are in parliament, and your seats, number of seats, what actually causes the party to win the election. So there's a lot of deep reflection now, considering how many votes they got versus how many seats, whether there needs to be electoral reform. And similarly, there are a lot of votes, worryingly, for a new right-wing party, which is led by Nigel Farage, who spearheaded Brexit, essentially. And his party, although didn't get that many seats, won quite a lot of votes, showing that there is a widespread support for a more hardline party, a lot of anger towards the Conservative Party, but also some worrying potential alignment with very right-wing positions held by some of those in the Reform Party.
So what would those very hardline right wing positions be from the Reform Party, Nigel Farage?
So Nigel Farage speaks very generally when he talks about Muslim communities in the UK. He talks about them generally as being a threat. He's talked about a rise of extremism amongst young Muslims in the UK, without actually particularly looking at some of the recent research, which shows a strong tendency within young Muslims to feel British and proud, whilst we do have real issues with radicalisation. And yes, you can say generally extremism is on the rise. He does have a way of talking about this in a very generalist way. And so when he was talking about young Muslims in particular, we have data against that for young Muslims. 18 to 24-year-old bracket, we have research to show that they are engaging in interfaith, very tolerant about having a Hindu prime minister, whilst also being passionate about their faith. So he speaks about issues that are very sensitive in a way that's inflammatory and scaremongering in order to bring greater support. And that's obviously worrying, considering we are an increasingly diverse country and will only continue to be increasingly diverse. And yes, we have an extremism issue, and the way to tackle that is to actually support those that are involved in tackling the issue too. So if our youth potentially could be used as a way to tackle extremism, that will be more difficult if we have someone like Nigel Farage attacking them.
All right, but so would necessarily like I don't follow Nigel Farage. I don't listen to, other than a few bits and bobs over here or there. I don't really follow the gentleman, so I don't know much about what he has said. But is his language the problem, or the message the problem? What exactly is the problem there?
So his general message is that the UK is going through a transformation that is against the British people, that it's losing its essential Britishness, that it's no longer um, the white working class Britain that he stands for. So that aligns with general populist sort of language about we're losing our culture, we're losing our heritage, and makes people feel like there is some kind of us and them and competition between different cultures in the UK, and sort of breeds that culture war dynamic, which is very problematic if we're looking to try and build a more cohesive and integrated UK, to have these kind of voices mainstreamed.
All right. So, but what would be the equivalent of Nigel Farage on the left then in England?
Our far left. So, I mean, I would say our far left is further far
Green
left.
Party?
Green Party is more problematic in its associations with extremist organizations, and um, its relationship with Islamists, and also our far left, like Jeremy Corbyn, when we had Jeremy Corbyn as the leader of the Labour Party, and
Yeah.
his relationship towards Hamas, and calling them his friends and laying a wreath for those who are considered to be involved in the Munich massacre of the Israeli athletes. Um, his behaviour and that kind of far left is very dangerous. What Nigel Farage is doing and what Nigel Farage represents is very problematic for cohesion and integration. It's very worrying that it is mainstreaming in the UK, but it is not supportive of, linked to terrorism in the way some of our far left is.
Yeah, yeah. I hear one more name a lot of times, like the Workers' Party and the Green Party. These two are the ones I hear all the time. And so, in terms of threat perception, listen, I'm asking this assuming. So the baseline assumption is I don't know. So that's why I'm asking all these questions, to trying to understand how. So it seems like Labour has gotten rid of a lot of its extremist elements, and isn't
Yeah.
that a good thing then? It's a
Yes.
positive thing, right?
So following the suspension of Jeremy Corbyn, Keir Starmer banned Jeremy Corbyn from being able to run as a Labour MP. The party under Jeremy Corbyn was found to be anti-Semitic, and to have infringed the Equalities and Protection Act. Um, there was a documentary on it, there were legal cases against it, and Keir Starmer has worked very hard to root that out to the extent that that is possible. Obviously, there will always be an element within Labour that aligns itself with those with Islamists and lends itself to anti-Semitism. There will always be that. Labour will always have to be very aware of that and quick to deal with it. But Keir Starmer has very much put that work in, removed all those that were named, and evidence against them. And obviously Jeremy Corbyn had to then run as an independent. Unfortunately, he did win. But we do have hope that Keir Starmer's Labour will be very different when it comes to anti-Semitism, will be proactive on anti-Semitism and other things like Hinduphobia as well. Like Keir Starmer has come out and said that there's no place for Hinduphobia in the UK, which is, I think, one of the very few times that we've seen that word even used by a politician other than those that they have the vote bank that requires them to use that kind of language. You know, for Keir Starmer to say that after he's won the election, no, actually, it was just before he won the election. To say that as the leader of the Labour Party, I think is quite important to show that he is going to take extremism and minority protection very seriously.
Now, this is very interesting. You told me Jeremy Corbyn still won as an independent. Then what does it say about the electoral reality that a man who clearly has extremely bigoted views when it comes to his views against two communities in general, because that guy and his career I have followed. from the
Yeah.
left, and he has extremely anti-Semitic views. I have no problem stating that he's an anti-Semite, and he's a Hinduphobe. He's both, and usually it's like a package deal. If you dislike the Jews, you just like the Hindus. It's like a package deal. It's like a combo package. French fries and burger are always together. It's like the Jews and Hindus are clubbed together. If I hate one, I have to hate the other.
Well, he sees them both as a part of a capitalist evil, and he packages them both in the realm of the of oppressor. If you look at things in an oppressor and oppressed matrix, and that's how Jeremy Corbyn views the world. That's why you'll see that he'll be supportive of communist leaders and states, and very active in tackling anything that is considered capitalist or Western, and quite self-hating really of the UK. If he'd become leader, it would be a disaster, because he's not really a supporter of the West in itself, and his rhetoric and the way he positions himself. But the fact that he has won is, considering the very recent history, and all the evidence put forward of his, if you maybe you don't want to go as far as to say anti-Semite, but definitely his support of anti-Semites, and he's endorsed anti-Semitic artwork. It's obviously, I mean, you really, if you're saying Hamas are your friends, how can you not say that you're an anti-Semite? But we do have to be careful with language, and people are worrying about saying words like that now that we have elected officials.
Oh, these are my views. I want to be very clear. These are my views, not yours. And well, Jeremy
It's
Corbyn
very
can
hard
come
to
at me.
argue that he's not, but it's also very dangerous to label, now that he is an MP. There'll be a lot of protection over the elected, and I'm sure we'll come on to the elected independents as well. We have to be careful of our
Yeah.
language around
So,
them.
so I wanted
Yeah.
to ask you this question. So Starmer has lost 5 seats in constituencies, particularly where there is a large Muslim population, and 4 he has lost to independents, and
Mm.
uh, one to the Conservative, apparently, where the Independent was running on a pro-Gaza platform and made a significant intervention. Now, why? uh, why has this happened? How can Labour lose the Muslim vote? That doesn't make sense to me. Electorally, right? They would vote left.
We had an organisation set up in the UK called the Muslim Vote UK,
Oh,
which
please,
were,
please explain this. I don't know anything about it.
yeah. So straight out of the Muslim Brotherhood playbook, and Karadawhi's aims for the Muslim Brotherhood's success in the West want for a gradual participationist growth of Islam towards an Islamic state. We've had organisations working on that in the UK for a long time now. The Muslim Association of Britain is probably our most closely linked and affiliated organisation to the Muslim Brotherhood, being that it is actually connected by family members. And the Muslim Association of Britain, Five Pillars, MEND, all organisations that have been named as Islamist extremist organisations in the UK, supported this new organisation, the Muslim Vote UK. And that has really turned the issues in Israel and Palestine into a tribal Muslim issue, and has put a lot of pressure on Muslim communities to vote for the candidates that it supports. It very early on drew up a spreadsheet and made it public of all of those that had not voted for the ceasefire in the right timely fashion that they needed them, wanted them to have agreed to, or voted for a ceasefire. And that included a lot of Labour candidates. And then they campaigned heavily against those Labour candidates and said, if you vote for these Labour candidates, you're voting against Muslims, essentially. You're voting against the Ummah. And they were very successful. They went out and screamed at Labour MPs that they had the blood of Palestinian children on their hands, that they were evil Zionist murderers. We've had MPs say that this was the worst election they've ever run in, that they were intimidated. One campaign team had their tyres slashed. A Muslim MP had her room stormed by masked Gaza Vote men, intimidated them. So it's also seen a real split, between the Muslim communities and Muslim MPs who are very against divisive tribal politics and this kind of rhetoric that care about Palestine but are not using it as a way to gain votes and to manipulate the Muslim communities into this greater sense of peril and us and them, and we need a revival. What we've seen is this Muslim Vote UK really celebrating their 5 wins and talking about how they're now strategizing for 2029. They'll be thinking about how to make more Muslims come out to vote because they felt like not enough Muslims came out to vote. That they'll be making sure that they only put forward one candidate in each area, so there's no risk of split votes, because we saw some Muslim Vote candidates not win because there were 2 in the same area, so they shared the vote and then didn't win. So they're already strategizing for 2029, and they've talked about how this is just the beginning. So it's really worrying, but that's what this has all been about. And our 5 candidates, I have been profiling them just over the last few days, are all incredibly troubling, from links to known Islamist organizations, family members who have praised Hamas and even met the leader of Hamas. We've obviously got Jeremy Corbyn. You've got Ayub Khan, who was thrown out the Liberal Democrats for anti-Semitism and refused anti-Semitism training. Pretty much all of them have been, like, their victory speeches have been met with "from the river to the sea," the chant that is considered by many to be genocidal. So yeah, it's a real mess. It's a real worry. And as Shabuna Mahmood, the Muslim MP who had these masked men come into her meeting, has said, this should be a real wake-up call for Britain.
This is scary. And I'll
this
explain.
has been the most troubling part of the whole election, is this sectarian challenge, the success of these 5, and the real success of what I can only see as being a Muslim Brotherhood strategy being met out in the UK.
So let me explain. As you were, this immediately reminded me of how the Khalistanis gamed the Canadian system. So let me give you some insight, because I've been following these suckers for a while. So what they do is exactly that. So Canada has this primaries, right? They have primaries where before the candidate is selected, they go and fight amongst each other to become the candidate. But the Canadian primary is so stupid. Anybody can go and vote in the Canadian primary. Anybody can go. So imagine if I'm a tourist and I am in a constituency in Toronto, and I'm like, hang on, there's a primary. I can just go and pretend to be someone, and I just go and vote. They don't check anything. It's not like you have to be a registered X or a registered Y. Like, the American primaries are far more robust than the Canadian one. So what the Khalistanis do is, every single party, wherever there is a riding, they call it a riding, the constituency, basically, it's a single constituency. They make sure that the person who wins that riding, the Sikh face, is a Khalistani. So no matter which party has a quote unquote Sikh, it's a Khalistani. It's not a normal Sikh. They have absolutely gamed the system. I mean, you can sit on the outside and like, damn, that's
Yeah,
that
that, that
that, that
that's
that's
exactly.
that's talent. That's talent. And now
Yeah,
what has happened is, the Muslims have found out in Canada, they're trying to game the system. So where the Muslim vote matters, they're trying to do it. Uh,
yeah,
the
it's
Chinese are
exactly
trying
the
to do
same.
it.
Exactly the same thing. I mean, they literally have, their website before the run up to the elections was a list of which Labour candidates you can't vote for, which ones you can, who are the right Muslims to vote for. But in a similar vein, we had a Sikh manifesto that came out that was backed by Sikh Fed, and Sikh Fed wrote that the only people that the government should be interfacing with from the Sikhs are the baptized Sikhs, and was already setting out that sort of, you must only interface with our type of Sikhs. They also put in their annual report that they want to see the breakup of India by its centenary. And they're the ones that are very involved
Best of luck to them.
with Parliament, very involved with the Labour Party. I think whilst Labour has spent a lot of time rooting out anti-Semitism, it's done nothing and understands nothing of the Khalistan links and pressures and influences within the Labour Party. And that's going to be something that will come to fore, I think, over the next few weeks as we begin to look at that, who's been put into what positions, and what connections they might have. And I think the Khalistan issue will be a big issue for Labour and Labour's relationship with India moving forward.
They don't understand what they are doing in their countries. We might be a new democracy. We're an old civilization. We Indians have memories. Indians have learned a lot of things. Religion was literally the reason our country got broken. We know what happens when this, we know where this ends. We know the end. Like, I just did a podcast with Jonathan Kay. He's a great Canadian journalist, someone I deeply respect, fierce individualist just like me. And John, he spoke about a so-called hate speech bill in Canada. I know where these things go, who pushes them in the parliament. The organizations are always so clear, and it all ends in one thing: blasphemy laws. And mark my words, they're coming, Charlotte, they're coming to your country too.
We already have a sort of soft enforcement of blasphemy law in the UK. We had the APPG for British Muslims put forward the Islamophobia definition, which extended into elements of preventing critique of Islam. We already have schools sort of self-managing risks so that they don't do anything that would be considered blasphemous. Because there hasn't been the right amount of protection afforded to schools. We've still got a teacher in hiding because they showed the image of the Prophet created by Charlie Hebdo on a class on freedom of speech, where they gave warning they were going to do it and said that anyone who was going to be offended could leave the classroom. That teacher is still in hiding, and I think through fear and through a lack of clear process around this, there's already a self-monitoring of blasphemy, because who's going to protect you and where is the process? So why would you go and do something that would cause yourself risk if you don't need to? So I think that that's already very much coming into the UK, and the Islamophobia definition hasn't helped.
Yeah. So, Shrimoy wrote a wonderful article explaining the British elections. I wanted to know your views on this. This scared me even more. He was like, if the minority Muslim population of a particular constituency touched the critical 10% mark, Labour's vote went down by an average of 11 points. That went down further by 23 points if the Muslim population went over 20% mark. In terms of vote share, that translated to around 7 percentage point decline. And where the Muslim population was in the region of 40%, Labour suffered a stunning 33.9 percentage point reversal in vote share. This is gaming the system. I don't know
Yeah,
how political this is. You have gamed the system.
and I've spoken to a Muslim in government who doesn't want to be named, who says it's so bad, the intimidation from the Muslim Vote UK and their who they have influenced, that even within his own family WhatsApp group, he can't talk about his own opinions about things, whether it comes to Israel and Palestine, because they have got everybody so hyped up and so tribal that if he said something wrong in his WhatsApp group, he would just be excommunicated from his family. And that is how well they've managed to sort of get into every home, to get everybody feeling that this is what you have to do for your brothers and sisters, that this is more important than anything else, and that to not do it is some great insult to you and your people. And people are just taking that mantle up and taking that forward themselves and doing the work for them. So it's really worrying.
Yeah, I mean, when I was trying to understand the magnitude of this, it's
Well,
insane.
we have started just before the election to put in safeguards. So MEND, Muslim Association of Britain, and Five Pillars, three of the key supporters of Muslim Vote UK. Muslim Association of Britain being the one that's associated with Muslim Brotherhood, MEND being notorious for divisive us and them rhetoric and working with young people to make them more fearful of society, and that they're like perpetually victimized, and they pulls them together in a dangerous way, considering their leadership has been found of Islamist sympathies by the Daily Mail and then lost their case standing against that. So you have these three organizations that have been identified now publicly by the government as Islamist extremists. There cannot be any working with them from government officials or elected officials. And so Labour cut all ties with MEND only a few months ago. So I think that's really important that happened just before Labour got got in. That's the beginning of what needs to be done, this real muscular liberalism, if you want to call it that, where you say these are the values of tolerance, equality, and respect. And if you don't have them, if you don't have them to a certain extent, like these groups, extremists, then you're not going to be worked with, and you're not going to get money, and you're not going to be met with by politicians and have nice photos taken of you to give you more kudos. So that's really important. We've also just had Majid Freeman arrested, and we had Hizb ut-Tahrir banned. So I think there have been quite a few things put in place just in the last few months. Majid Freeman was arrested yesterday. This is the guy who was very involved in the riots.
Leicester riots.
Yeah. So he's just been arrested and charged, and now is awaiting trial on terrorism charges. So there's work being done, and I think at a fast rate, to try and curb the situation. But these organizations and these people have been worked with by government over the years since the 1960s. It used to be the strategy to work with the Muslim Brotherhood to tackle ISIS. And then they realized that was counterproductive, because the Muslim Brotherhood ideology lends itself to, then if one is frustrated by not getting something done peacefully, they're in the mindset that they then might take it to violent action. So yeah, the government has made quite a few, that was Conservative government, have made quite a few mistakes along the way. And now there is a large presence and a large influence, and a more muscular approach in which organizations are banned and people are obviously charged with terrorism offenses is what is needed.
Do you think Labour is going to be successfully they're going to be successful in managing this pressure group? Because we're not going to discuss the report. That's going to be a separate podcast. I did read your report, by the way, the one you sent across, Britain's attitudes to faith in public life. I'm specifically discussing that. By the way, lovely report. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. But in that report, Charlotte, one thing stood out to me, because I wanted to connect this with the current thing that you're talking about. And in Islam, I read your report. It says Muslim respondents were most in agreement, 67%, with British politicians talking about their faith being a positive thing, compared with Sikhs as the least positive at 41%. And the next one, 77% Muslim respondents thought British politicians should listen to what faith leaders have to say on social and political issues, compared to 48% Christian respondents. This should not be taken lightly. Listen, the grip of the mullah on the voter in that community is dangerously high.
Well, Islam has not secularized in the way Christianity has. It's not existed for as long, so it's not gone through the same time to go through that process. But also, the actual script itself is far less giving towards secularism. It's a book of instructions and rules about how to manage a society. Things like jizya tax, for example. It's very prescriptive. Whereas the Bible, for example, it has a whole section of poems, and then it has stories of what Jesus did that you're supposed to think about and take lessons from. Apart from the 10 Commandments and some of the stuff in the Old Testament, it's not particularly rule-based, and it definitely is far more parable, story, poetry, than it is a set of this is how this must be done. Whereas you then turn to the Quran, which contextually was brought about because everyone was going a bit haywire and going back to paganism, and it felt ruleless, and the sense was there needed to be a set of rules to bring people back under the fold of controlled religion. So therefore the Quran is very prescriptive, which then is more problematic when you come to how do we move this book on. And people are working on it. There are those working on revisions of the text. There are Muslims that are working on reform, but that's an incredibly hated area of work, obviously, and incredibly difficult to strip that apart and create something that works for the secular equal society today. They do things like say that this was for that time, but if you take the essence of the rule, so if the rule is women get a certain amount of inheritance, for example. If the essence of that rule is women get something, then the new rule in this context is women get equal. And that's how reformists are trying to do it. But you can see that's far more difficult than taking the New Testament and doing the same.
I was, when I read this, I was like, damn,
Yeah. I
damn.
mean, I don't think it's surprising. I wasn't surprised by that result at all. Yeah, I think that
Like
it's a
so many
long way
points,
to go.
right? Like 80% of Jews agreed that UK is a Christian country. 64% Christians agreed that UK is a Christian country. The Jews agreed more than the Christians. Then that was the funniest bit in that report. I was like, damn Jews.
They
63% Hindus.
yeah. The
60%,
Jewish respondents came
63%.
across as the most secular, and the most in agreement of comments about Christian heritage and historic culture of the country. They came across most secular and most in agreement with those comments. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the Hindus were 63% that UK is a Christian country. 38% Muslims. 38%. Damn.
But
I was like,
interestingly,
what the hell?
they were asked another question, because they might be thinking that the country is now secular, or it's not ruled by the church anymore. But they were asked another question. They were asked, did they think that the UK's Christian heritage was important? And they were all over 50% for that. Like, all of them were over 50%. I think the Muslim respondents were over just by one. I think it was like 51%. I think that the Jewish respondents again were up at 100%. I think the Muslim respondents were somewhere in the late 60s, early 70s, and the Christian respondents were in the 80s. So I think that the framing of that question, they might have been reading into it, is it run by the church? No, not so much. But is Christian heritage important? Which I thought there would be a lot lower, to be honest, for the non-Christian respondents. I thought all above 50%. That surprised me. I thought that was quite positive.
Hmm. So it was just fascinating for me. Like I was going through this report, and when I try to compare the elections through the report it was like multiple ways. Like 75% of Muslim and Christian respondents have friends with faiths or beliefs about God that are different from their own.
Yeah, there's a high
96%. Yeah,
yes or no?
96% of Hindu respondents and 100% of Jewish respondents recorded the same.
Yeah. But
96 and 100%.
there aren't very many Jews in the country as well. The way to look at that question. I think the Christians responded very low on that. They were shockingly low on having friends of other faiths. But you just touched on voting, because that was a really interesting part of we did a follow-up survey, and we asked about whether they will be influenced by religion in the ballot box, and the 18 to 24-year-olds were the most likely out of all of the age groups. I think it was something like 34% that they would be influenced by their faith in when they voted, which was huge compared to something like 17% of the 65 plus. So that was really concerning. That jumped right out to me, as we're seeing an increasing religiosity and an increasing influence of faith amongst the 18 to 24 and the 25 to 34-year-olds. They were also in the 30% bracket. And then it drops right down at 65 plus to between 10 and 15%, I think. So we have a more religious and more influenced by faith youth coming into a country where coming to vote within a country where we need to have everyone represented, and that really worried me.
My goodness. And you know what's interesting? If you try to put the two and two together, there's a significant chunk of these people with high religiosity quotients are going to end up voting for Workers' Party. The other one, but I forgot the name of that party that I mentioned, the Green Party,
Green?
or Reform, or Reform. You're going to see the trend that the Tories and the Labours, I don't know, but I won't be surprised. That's my brain telling me that the Tories and Labour will not get these votes. And all these uber, I'm going to push my religion to your face kind of people, they're going to vote for these three parties. Tories and Labour are in serious trouble. in the
and
future.
the independents as well. Yeah. I think it's worrying. I think it's worrying the way in which the elections have played out as well, with how the percentage has moved into seats. We also had something like 51% voter turnout. That's terrible. Nearly half of the population didn't vote.
But why do you think? Because the voting percentage has dropped, right, significantly in this election.
There's a lot of voter apathy. There was a sense that whilst people didn't want to vote Conservative, I think this is typical when you swing from a party that's been in for a long time to a new party, is people were like, I don't want to vote for the party I've always voted for forever, but I'm not quite ready to put my allegiance to something I've stood against for my whole voting life. So it's quite a big leap to go from voting for Conservative, maybe being a part of a family that's always voted Conservative, and that's essentially your political tribe, to then move to support the opposite tribe and vote for them. I think that's quite a big leap for people. So people faced with that question then are likely to not vote. Unless they're really angry, and then they vote for the protest party like Reform.
All right. So now I want to ask you a couple of more questions. What is the good side? We've discussed so many bad things. What are the good things that we can talk about in this election? Because I don't want to depress everyone. They're like, oh, we're gonna die.
So I think we can be positive that Labour, when it comes to India, for example, has put in effort before the election as well. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner came over to talk about the trade agreement and economic ties and technological ties with India. David Lammy, who's now the Shadow Foreign Secretary, he came over to meet Jai Shankar, and work and effort has been put in place to build that relationship. Keir Starmer has said that it's a very important relationship. Obviously, has made a public statement about Hinduphobia. However, with all that being said, they don't seem to be changing the position that the Conservative Party had on immigration. And that extends to India visas and working visas. I don't think there's going to be much of a change there. But I do think that the real risks and the alarmist information that we had with Jeremy Corbyn and how he positioned himself with Kashmir and how he was seen to be very supportive of Pakistan, that's not something that we'll see to that extremity, but we will see it with the pro-Khalistan element. So it's hard to find a great deal of positive. There's a lot of concern. There's always concern with change. But the way I'm remaining positive is to say that this is an opportunity for change. The Conservatives have not done well to tackle extremism themselves, and they pulled out a lot of stops last minute to try and get elected, and that didn't necessarily come as genuine, and it's something that should have been done a lot earlier. So I think we can say that the Conservatives in my area have not necessarily done what they needed to do until right at the end, with banning certain groups and listing certain groups as extremist organisations and getting proactive on that side. Labour now has an opportunity to do it differently. It wasn't working with Conservative, so an opportunity to do it differently. It could go terribly, but at least there's an opportunity for change, and there's enthusiastic people now in positions of influence, when we've had tired and corrupt people for years who have lied, who have been involved in scandal after scandal. Maybe fresh, enthusiastic new people will mean better work done, at least more honest work done. But yeah, there's a lot to be concerned about. I mean, the positive really is just that it's new and there's change, and the corrupt lot are out. That's about it.
So, so many interesting things, like their vote share really increased in Scotland. In Wales, their vote share went down. I mean, it's even in this landslide, apparently they have had the lower vote share, like compared
Yeah,
to Blair and his victory. So what the hell has happened here?
34% or 36% of the vote share, and then the Conservatives had 23% of the vote share. So, and that you can see how that really doesn't make sense when you see that they won 411 of the seats. Well, it makes sense because of the way our elections work, but it doesn't make sense for actually reflecting what the people in the UK want and who they wanted in. I mean, I engaged in tactical voting because where I am voting, this part of the country, it didn't make sense to vote for who I wanted to vote for because they had no chance, but to vote for who I wanted to vote for to not have the party that I didn't want in. And that a lot of people were doing that, voting for something that they didn't necessarily want, but that was the vote that they needed to make if they wanted to make sure that this party didn't win, or yeah.
It's so complex that, and the biggest problem here is that the lower voting percentage, which is something I don't know why people don't realize that. And which communities do you think usually tend to have lower voting percentage? I'm not surprised. It must be white
Oh,
people.
you mean low vote turnout? Oh,
Yeah.
I'm not sure. That there will be research on that. I'm not sure. I know that the Muslim Vote UK were very upset about low Muslim turnout, but I haven't looked into the stats of which communities are voting.
I can bet it must be the white people who did not turn out to vote. It's the standard model everywhere. I always ask, reach out to my friends and ask them, did you vote? No. Why? Oh, I was just too bored. And
Yeah,
it's a huge
yeah,
problem. It's a huge problem. And then they're like, oh, when did this change happen? So I want to ask you, what's
yeah.
your point of view on the Tories? Like where do they go in all of this after
I mean,
reform
they
getting
really
so
messed
many
up.
seats?
They really messed up. So they've had, God, how many prime ministers now? And then obviously, infamously, uh, we had who? There's so many I don't even remember who. Who only lasted
There
for
was
like
Rishi.
1 month.
Before Rishi, there was that woman. I forgot her name. Before that,
Yeah,
there was Boris Johnson. Then before Boris Johnson, there was another woman. I forgot her
Liz
name.
Truss. Liz Truss.
Liz
Liz
Truss.
Truss
Yes.
famously lasted for less time than someone's cabbage lasted in the fridge, and that became a meme. Um, but we had Boris Johnson having parties with a DJ in yeah, having parties with a DJ at a time when people were in hospitals dying and their family members couldn't come and visit them. So that I think that really stuck as a real issue. That was called Partygate, they called it, and it was one of the big scandals. And he lied about it. And then the evidence was found on his phone that yes, he was having parties, that there was alcohol, that there was even music, and so many like gaffes and memes made about it, but it is horrendous about how he lied to the people, told them that they couldn't move, they couldn't go and visit friends, they couldn't go to hospital, and then had people drinking and having parties. So I think that was probably one of the bigger of the issues. Liz Truss's 1 month resulted in mortgage prices hitting the roof. We had basically went into a mini economic downturn and panic because of her mini budget. Crashed the economy, some would say. So that's not been taken well at all. And then right at the end, you had Rishi Sunak leaving early the D-Day commemorations, and you had veterans of the war in their 90s saying publicly on the television that he was ashamed to the country. And considering the attachment and pride that the UK has instilled in British people towards the veterans and towards commemorating and remembering the war, to have veterans say things like that on the television just, I think, really, really turned the final few who might have been staying with Conservatives around.
Hmm. So what do you think is going to be the net result of all of this? Do you think Labor will successfully manage the extremist elements? Like, for an example, I'm again reading from Srimoy's article where he has quoted Foreign Secretary David Lammy, who has
Mm.
told the BBC that Labor would would, quote, work with partners to seek Palestinian recognition, while the Coventry South MP Zara Sultana holds that her party's position on Gaza is, quote, a stain.
Her position as a, what did you say?
It's a stain, like it's a damn shame kind of a thing.
So who was saying that the party's position was a stain?
Zara Sultana, Coventry South MP.
Okay, okay. Um, I don't think that is going to be our biggest concern. Um, I don't think our biggest concern is going to be where. Okay, you've got. I can read it now. Um, yeah, I don't. I think that the Gaza issue has played out to um, win certain positions in the election in different ways. But I think the main issue we're going to see with Labour is whether it's going to still work with Islamist organisations and Islamists, and how is it going to defend schools, for example, from um, threats against teachers who have engaged in blasphemy? You know, are we going to have a defence if a school comes under threat and intimidation for engaging in LGBT related teaching at schools? What is going to be done about madrasas who are known to have children being beaten up if they don't recite the Quran properly? What about some of our Sharia councils that have been tolerant of domestic abuse? These are the kind of big questions that the Conservative Party wasn't able to handle. It's going to be very difficult for the Labour Party, who relies on support from certain voting blocs that are sympathetic to Sharia councils and do not want LGBT teaching in the schools. This is, I think, going to be where we're going to have real difficulty. When it comes to Palestine and Israel, two-state solution, in the end, this is going to be something Israel and decides and works out. And yes, international pressure makes a difference, but ultimately this is a foreign affair that is Israel's. What we're going to have an issue with is how are these domestic issues dealt with? Are we going to see an increasing extremism that affects schooling, that affects secularism, that puts young kids at risk, that puts women at risk? That's where the real challenge is going to be.
Yeah, but I have never understood this. Like, for me, uh, if somebody from the Hindu community had a certain problematic point of view, I don't care if they're Hindu, I'd call them out. Even if they're a minority in the West, if somebody from the Hindu community had a problematic point of view, I would call them out.
Yeah, we have that.
Why
We
is
have
it?
that.
Yeah, why is it
They
such a problem to call out bad views in the Islamic community? Why is it Islamophobia? Like, I have never understood this point
Well,
of view.
because they've managed to own the definition. The Islamists have managed to own the definition of what Islamophobia is. Is again, it's the Muslim Brotherhood tactic to control how Islam is defined, control the way in which it is discussed, even, and to create a great sense of fear around the notion of Islamophobia and to pull people together around that. And it's very easy to get someone to say, "Oh yes, I want to support some action that's around hate crime and that's against minorities." That seems like a really positive thing to do. It takes a lot of understanding and deep comprehension to tell the difference between someone who's genuinely trying to help people facing anti-Muslim attack and someone who's trying to gradually bring in an Islamist agenda. That's actually really hard to tell the difference unless you spent years in the game and, like yourself, Kushal, spent a lot of time looking into it. I think for most who go into politics who've maybe been dealing with energy or tech or the economy, it's going to be very difficult for them to discern between those two things and even understand the first thing about Islam in the first instance. So yeah, it's been really easy for that to enter into the UK.
Yeah, it's just disgusting. For me, I don't care what religion you belong to. I'm a moral objectivist. If you have bad, shitty values, I don't care which
Yeah.
part of the world you're from.
Oh, and
You
I
have
was going to
bad,
say,
shitty values.
we've had a lot of Muslims come out and speak out against this and set up whole organisations to challenge it. We've had Quilliam, we've had Muslims for British Secular Democracy. There was one called Active Change. Um, over the years, they've come and they've gone for. They've been intimidated, they've been threatened, they've been told they're not Muslim, they've been told they're coconuts, they're white on the inside, brown on the outside. They've faced physical threats. One organization had its offices stormed and they had to move and hide their offices. The Muslim man Fayaz Mughal, who used to be an MP, who runs something called Tell Mama and Faith Matters, which are about tackling anti-Muslim hate. He's gone and living in a different country now because he can't deal with how much hate he faced for being a Muslim who tackled extremism, even though he leads one of the biggest organizations for tackling anti-Muslim hate at the same time. So I think that the pressure on those that then come out and speak, you have to be someone who's willing to take all of that to do it. Most people just want to get on with their lives. Like, okay, extremism is a problem, but I'm not about to martyr myself on Twitter and say something and then face threats for it.
Well, we're almost at the end, Charlotte. So before we wrap up, is there anything else you think we could not cover about the elections?
No, I think we summed it up really. That whilst the news will be saying the biggest thing about this elections is the landslide victory, I think really the issues around these elections have been a need now for electoral reform that it doesn't quite work. A rise of sectarianism, a rise of independence on the back of a Muslim Brotherhood agenda, which is what I think the Muslim vote is, entryism of Islamism into politics. And what we need to look out for in the next few weeks is who is positioned into what and what is the Khalisthani influence going to be. And then in the next few months, we'll see how the relationship, I think, with India is going to move forward from here. But I think that there'll be a prioritization on the trade agreement. And when a party actually gets elected, they have to get real with national security threats. They have to get real with what the economy needs. And they do an awful lot to get into power. When you see them in power and they have all the access to the information of what they need to do, they very rarely are quite as wacky as they've appeared to try and get themselves voted in.
I think the long-term solution for Western societies is actually something that Australians do: compulsory voting, where on average every Aussie election has 95 to 96% people voting, and what results in that is the entire political pantheon of Australia, right? Whether the right wing or the left wing, they're very centrist. They are very centrist. Whether so, in Australia, if one government goes and the other comes, is like, they're almost all the same, and that's the result of compulsory voting. Because when everybody's voting, usually the world goes center, because most
Yeah,
people are centrists, and and
I think
and
that's a
and
very
and
good
I hate
idea.
this as someone who doesn't like the government interfering
No,
and telling
no,
him
but
to do
I think you're
things.
right. I
I think we'll
agree.
have to
It's just
force
that
people to vote. That's the only solution of this mess.
yeah,
Otherwise, people will form groups and they will keep hijacking ridings or constituencies or whatever
I'd
the
say
word we want to
I'd say
use it.
that's probably whilst we're both staunch liberals, that might be an illiberal action that we need.
The Aussies do it. I want you to study this, how the Aussies have managed it. I think Claire Lehman at Quillette, she explained this beautifully in one of her interviews or essays. I don't remember exactly. But then I
Mm,
started looking it up and I was like, is she making sense or not? I tried looking at the statistics and I was like, actually, then I started breaking down policies of the Aussie version of the Tories and the other version of the Labour in Australia. And I was like, this is very interesting. This is actually what happens is when more and more people vote, right? They tend to vote for a very centrist point of view, and that's why the Aussie left is not like open borders, we let any in, because their voters will be like, shut up, no open borders, we decide who we let in, and we don't let you game the system and many other things. So it's very interesting. But hey, Charlotte, thank you very much for coming and speaking with me on the podcast. And hopefully this time, if you visit India or I visit England, we'll definitely catch up. We need to catch up.
yeah, that would be good. Let's make that happen next time.
Yeah.
Thank you,
So
Kushal.
everyone, go follow Charlotte on Twitter or X, whatever you guys want to call it. I still call it Twitter, but her Twitter handle is there in the description of the podcast. You can follow her. She publishes a lot of papers. Also, we're going to discuss a couple of papers sometime in the future. But I was like, well, the British elections have happened, so might as well discuss the elections right now.
Perfect.
But
That's good.
once I'm done reading the papers. I need to read them at least a couple of times, and then I need to look at the citations and check them all out. And once I'm done, we'll have Charlotte back on the podcast. Until then, everybody, you know the drill. Keep supporting the Charvak podcast. Whether you can just like this video, like, subscribe to the channel. Or if you're an audio listener, you can support it on the audio platform. If you want to become a member, please join the membership program on YouTube or on Patreon, or you can buy the merch. I'll see you guys next time. Until then, namaste. Take care. Bye bye.